We're going to go ahead and begin. So welcome to, I think this is like our 13th or 14th monthly webinar, so I appreciate you all attending. I know we've got some offices who are meeting in their conference rooms, and I appreciate that. Right now we've got about 32 attendees online. That doesn't include the conference room attendance. And I know we've got some managers online as well, and I want to give a heads out to, I believe, Paige Heavey, Carefree, Jim Callery, Green Valley, Jim Durham, Lake Havasu, and Leah Lichter-Rodig, Chandler. We've got some OAs also on the call, which I appreciate. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Lisa Gilmore. And I believe we probably have more than that because there's some call-in users that are unidentified, anonymous, shall we say. That's because when you log in and it gives you the phone number, and then underneath that there is another, underneath the passcode, there's another number that you put in that would bring up your name, so you can remember that next time if you want to be identified. So, okay, so can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Say yay if you can.
Yes.
Hey.
Woohoo! Good, good. Anybody can't hear me? Nobody answered on that one. Okay, we're going to go ahead and mute you all. So in case you have any.
To unmute your line, press *6 or #6.
All now muted, and
the leader has muted your line. To unmute your line, press #6.
Hopefully you can all hear me now. You have been muted. If you have to take another phone call on your line or whatever, please do not put us on hold. If you need to take another call, just hang up this session and then take the call, and then you can always relog back in. So I'd appreciate you doing that. Other than that, I think this is going to be shorter than usual session because the two forms that we're going to talk about are relatively short forms, but it does leave extra time if any of you have any questions regarding the forms, any questions in general regarding any other forms, any questions in general regarding anything else, please feel free to ask that at the end of the session. If you want to send me a note as we speak, you can see at the bottom right-hand part of your screen there is a place to essentially send me like an email, and actually goes to Stephanie, who's my assistant. She's on the line as well. She's my little guru, my audio-video person. I should say my audio person. I'm doing the video. And we also will be recording these sessions. So if you want to refer back to them, give us a few days, and they will be up on Inside AZ Moves. Or if you want to give it, you managers, if you want to refer it to any of your agents, you have that ability as well. Okay, we're going to get started here. The first form we're going to talk about is the buyer pre-closing walkthrough. And I'm sure many of you have noticed, although this is a new form, it's a new AAR form. It only came out this past February 2013. It probably looks relatively familiar because it is essentially the same form we have used for years and years and years and years. Kind of the history behind the AAR form, and maybe some of you have already heard this. I am on the AAR's Risk Management Committee, and I have been on this committee for many years, and this is essentially the Forms Committee. Any forms that AAR decides to create or revise must go through this committee. So we were having a committee meeting one day, and one of the committee members, actually the chair of the committee, who is from Lake Havasu City, came to the meeting and said, hey, look at this new form that Lake Havasu Association just came out with. And he gave us all copies, and so I'm looking at it, and I was like, wow, that's pretty much our form. And then another committee member who's from Tucson said, well, Tucson Association of Realtors has a form that looks identical to this as well, and they happened to have that one. They passed that one out. That was also looked identical to our form. And then another big broker in the Phoenix area, actually statewide, he's on the committee as well, and he said, well, that's the same form that we use as well. So the bottom line is everybody's been using our Coldwell Banker form with their logo for many, many years. And I've always said, and this is not the first time this has happened, probably the more than 10th time this has happened, where either other companies or the Arizona Association of Realtors have actually adopted our form. I always say that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. If they take one of our Coldwell Banker forms and make it a statewide form, that's pretty darn cool. So when it was decided by the committee to go ahead and work on a buyer pre-closing walkthrough, it only made sense that I chaired that work group, which I did. So although you'll notice a little bit of formatting change, a little bit of verbiage change, it is essentially the same form that we have had for years and years and years. This is a required form by Coldwell Banker Residential Brokerage on all buyer-controlled sales. Buyer-controlled sales, obviously, are when we represent the buyer, we must have a buyer pre-closing walkthrough form in our file. And the reason for this is pretty much obvious, hopefully, is the fact that if you have a walkthrough and if you have a closing, and let's say on the walkthrough, buyer says everything's fine, and then 2 days after closing, buyer calls you and says, hey, my air conditioning went out, and you know, it really wasn't working well when I did the walkthrough. And hopefully you were there at the walkthrough as well, but if you weren't, or even if, you know, sometimes buyers have a tendency to blame everybody else other than themselves, they'll come back and say, you knew it wasn't working, or it wasn't working at the time. You say, gee, you know, you had the form, you didn't mark number 2 saying that there was any problems, and you know, now if you don't have anything in writing, now you have a he said, she said something. So if you have something in writing, the buyer can't come back later and say, well, I told you the air conditioning wasn't working, or I told you there was an issue with the property, and you told me the seller would have it fixed. You say, well, no, I didn't. We never had that conversation. Here's the walkthrough form that you completed. So essentially, that's why we require it, have a form in writing in our file. It is not required by the contract. It does say that the seller will make the property available for a walkthrough, for a buyer walkthrough, but the form itself, or a form itself, is not required by the contract, but again, it is required by this company. So this, again, it's a short and sweet form, and essentially you've got a place for buyer, seller, the premises address, and some of the verbiage has been changed from our version. And it starts out by saying that upon advice of broker and in accordance with the provisions of the contract relating to the walkthrough or walkthroughs, buyer or buyer's inspectors, our form said, or buyer's representatives, which could give the perceived okay from that other agents can do a walkthrough on behalf of their buyer. And as we know, and as our company has always said, we absolutely do not want to do a walkthrough for our buyers. If our buyers are not available to do a walkthrough, or they don't care to do a walkthrough, then they can either waive the walkthrough or they can get someone else, such as inspector, as the form says, or anybody can be. It doesn't say home inspector. It can be anybody. It can be a family member. It can be anybody. They can do the walkthrough for them. But we certainly, under no circumstances, no matter how friendly you are with the buyer, or no matter what, you never do a walkthrough on behalf of your buyer. I always say in my classes, you might as well put an L for liability right in the middle of your forehead if you ever do that, for obvious reasons. You do the walkthrough, you say everything is fine, buyer moves in, and everything in their eyes is not fine, and they're going to blame you. So it's a real easy black and white liability situation. So it says buyer or buyer's inspectors completed a pre-closing walkthrough of the premises on such and such date. So then it says buyer must complete one of these 3 sections. They only have 3 choices, 3 boxes. First one, buyer finds the premises is in a substantially the same condition as of the date of the contract acceptance, and any corrections or repairs agreed to by the seller have been completed and warranted items are in working condition. Okay? Again, warranted items referenced back to the purchase contract, and I'll just read that section quickly as soon as I find it. Okay, it's Section 5A. It's under seller warranties, and it says seller warrants and shall maintain and repair the premises so that at the earlier possession or close of escrow, everywhere in the contract, it always says earlier of possession or close of escrow. The reason why it's got that language is a pre-possession. If a buyer takes the property, moves into the property, has access to the property prior to close of escrow, which would be pre-possession, then they essentially are accepting the property at that point, which is prior to close of escrow, in its as-is condition. And we do have exactly that verbiage in our pre-possession agreement between the seller and buyer. So again, so that the earlier possession or close of escrow, number one, all heating, cooling, mechanical, plumbing, and electrical systems, including swimming pool and or spa, motors, filter systems, cleaning systems, and heaters, if any, freestanding range/oven, and built-in appliances will be in working condition. Number 2 says all other agreed-upon repairs and corrections will be completed pursuant to Section 8J, which is the buyer disapproval section. And number 3, the premises, including all additional existing personal property included in the sale, will be in substantially the same condition as on the date of contract acceptance. And number 4, all personal property not included in the sale and all debris will be removed from the premises. So the buyer, if they mark number 1 on the pre-closing walkthrough, says they are accepting the property, excuse me, according to the seller warranties section, and that the fact that any agreed-upon repairs have been completed in the property is either those repairs have been made and or it's in the same, substantially the same condition as it was at the time the contract was executed. Number 2, buyer does the walkthrough, they check everything, and they find there's issues. And either the seller agreed to make some repairs that were not done, or they were not done in a workmanlike manner, or the property is not in substantially the same condition as it was at contract acceptance. For instance, we've had a lot of rain the last few weeks, and I'm sure it has caused a lot of leaks, roof leaks, in many, many homes throughout the state over the last few weeks. So let's assume the property's been vacant, or it doesn't even have to be vacant, but let's just say it's vacant. Buyer does the walkthrough and it's been vacant for a while, and now there's evidence of roof leaks. Well, now the property's not in the same condition as it was. So that would be an item that the buyer would make note in Section 2 on the walkthrough form. So it says buyer finds that the premises is in substantially the same condition as of the date of contract acceptance. Any corrections or repairs agreed to by the seller have been completed and warranted items are in working condition with, a big old with, the following exceptions. Okay? So again, don't mark number 1, but number 2 says, okay, everything is okay, but. So there's a big but there. And this is where the buyer will be specific on what are the issues in the house. When I say specific, you know, you talk about a roof leak. Well, where is the roof leak? Is it in the garage? Is it in the family room? Is it in the kitchen? Be specific. Or if a roofer was supposed to repair or replace some tiles on the roof, which tiles? Did they maybe got to some of them, didn't get to all of them? So the buyer should be specific so the seller knows exactly what the issues are. So now, essentially, what do you have? You have a potential breach of the contract. The property is not in the same condition as it was, or the seller did not make the repairs that they said they were going to make in a workmanlike manner. So now you have an automatic cure period notice, and this cure period notice is actually now, or always has been in our form, or it has been for about the last, I put it in about, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, shortly after the cure notice was incorporated into the 2005 purchase contract. So then you have the cure notice. Pursuant to Section 7A of the contract, which is the cure notice section, delivery of this form to seller shall constitute notice of a noncompliance with the contract as specified herein. The seller fails to cure the noncompliance within 3 days after delivery of this notice, which is the cure period, the failure to comply shall become a breach of a contract. So essentially, like I said, this is a curable event because it's a potential breach of the terms and conditions of the purchase contract. So instead of doing a separate cure notice based on number 2 of the form, we have incorporated the cure notice right into the form itself. And interestingly, when I said, you know, how Tucson Association, Lake Havasu Association, and some of the other brokers have been using my form or our form for many, many years, the one thing that they weren't using, so that they were copying an old form, is they didn't have the cure period notice in there. And anytime a form is either created or revised through the AAR work group or the AAR committee, it then goes out to a loop of realtors throughout the state. There's probably maybe 40 or 50 realtors that get a draft copy of any new or revised form, and they're always asked to comment on that. And it's kind of a basic overview of the whole state. There's people from all over. And the number 1 comment regarding this form was they really liked the idea of having the cure period notice built into the walkthrough, so you don't have to either forget to issue the seller a cure notice, or you don't have to, that's one less piece of paper that you have to worry about. So, so we have that. So again, 1 was everything was fine. 2, everything was not fine. There's the cure period notice. Obviously, what we did is we blew up the form. So the cure period notice on the form itself, as I'm sure you've all seen, is right underneath 2, right above number 3. And then finally, we have number 3, where buyer waives the right to a pre-closing walkthrough of the premises. Buyer acknowledges the buyer has the right to and was advised to conduct a pre-closing walkthrough as described in the contract, and buyer declined. Maybe the buyer doesn't care. Maybe it's an investment property. Maybe they're going to tear it down. Maybe they're buying it for land value only, and they have no plans of even living in the house whatsoever. They're just going to bulldoze it and start over. So they don't care if it's an investor. They're just going to rip everything out, and they're going to put down to the slab, and they're going to start over. So why do a walkthrough? And buyer declines. So buyer declines to do it by acting against broker's advice, which is really important. By acting against broker's advice, by not conducting a pre-closing walkthrough, buyer accepts responsibility and hereby releases, indemnifies, and holds harmless seller and brokers from liability for any defect that could have been discovered, but they chose not to by not doing the walkthrough. They would check number 3. So that's essentially, again, short and sweet, easy form, lots of white space. It shouldn't bog down any buyer not understanding the form because it is a pretty simple form. So what I'm going to do is, or staff, go ahead and unmute everybody. And so if anybody has any questions right now regarding this form, they can certainly go ahead and ask them at this point. So you're all
unmuted. The leader has unmuted your line. To unmute your line, press *6 or #6.
Martha?
No one? Yes.
Yes, Martha, hi, this is Edith.
Hi, Edith.
Yes, I have a question in regards to close of escrow. Say I do the walkthrough on Wednesday night, and I have the close of escrow Friday, but he has 3 days to comply, so that might be after the close of escrow. Does this affect the close of escrow? Do I need to move that, or what's the situation?
Very, very good question, Edith, and I appreciate you asking it. The answer, according to Michelle Lind at AAR, she's now the CEO of AAR. She used to be the general counsel for AAR, and according to her book, obviously we can't give legal advice, but the answer is if they don't have those 3 days to cure prior to the close of escrow can be pushed back until those 3 days are completed. So what we would do at that point is either suggest that our buyers seek legal counsel regarding that, or immediately talk to the listing agent and say, hey, here's the problem. The property is not in substantially the same condition, or there are repairs that were not completed in a, quote, workmanlike manner. And since the buyer has issued a cure notice, which now essentially would put the, if the walkthrough was done on Wednesday, it was supposed to close on Friday, so you have essentially Wednesday, Thursday, or you issue the cure on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday would be your cure, or the end of your cure, but you can't close now until Monday. So essentially it's putting up off the close until the following Monday. You want to make sure that everybody is on the same page and they understand that. So, but that's a really good question on whether or not they can postpone the closing. According to Michelle Lynn's book, and according to Michelle Lynn is, yes, they can. But again, we would tell them to either seek legal counsel regarding that or to immediately get on the phone with a listing agent so everybody's on the same page that close of escrow will now be delayed until Monday, to give the seller the 3 days to cure whatever the buyer put in number 2. So hopefully, did that answer your question, Edith?
Yes, thanks very much, Marta.
Absolutely. Anybody else? Okay. Well, then we're going to go on to form number 2, which is the As-Is Addendum. This is another, just coincidental, happens to be another ex-Coldwell Banker form. I'd say probably 6 or 7 years ago, AAR came to me and said, do you guys have an As-Is Addendum? I said yes, and they said, can we take a look at it and potentially adopt it for AAR, and that's exactly what they did. Again, they do some wordsmithing. Their forms always end up to be a little bit better than our forms. I'll have to admit, they've got lots of attorneys looking at these forms and lots of eyes looking at these forms, so they always end up being just a tad better than what our forms are, but essentially the same. So one of the big things in As-Is, the misnomer that a lot of sellers and some agents have, is the fact that if I am selling my house as is, I do not have to disclose. That is 100% incorrect. By law, and again, there's no statute, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard me say this before, there's no statute in the state of Arizona regarding seller's duty to disclose. But there's case law, common law, any lawsuits that go to the appellate court or higher, which would be the Supreme Court in Arizona, any of those decisions that come out of either one of those courts make case law. They're published decisions, and they make case law. Superior Court does not. So you could have 2 identical lawsuits that go through Superior Court, and one judge or jury rules one way, and another judge or jury could rule 180% or 80 degrees different than that other court. Same identical case. You get 2 completely different decisions out of those courts. That's the reason why Superior Court does not make law, but appellate court, Supreme Court does. There are numerous cases on the books regarding sellers' duties to disclose, whether it's an as-is situation or not. So under no circumstances can a seller hide behind an as-is addendum or hide behind anything, including no spuds available. How many times have we seen that in listings? Hide behind the fact that they have a duty to disclose any defects that they know about the house. Kind of as a side note, the spuds, as we know, is required by the purchase contract. But again, that particular form is not required by law. The spuds is an avenue that AAR has built into the contract and came up with the form as a way for the seller to disclose everything, and I mean everything they know about the property. It's amazing to me that you see no spuds available in MLS on these listings. Maybe a few exceptions. REOs, we know that REOs really don't know anything about the property. Maybe some relocation listed properties, but other than that, there's really no reason why a seller cannot fill out a spuds. You see, well, it's a flipper. It's an investment property. Okay, a flipper. He buys a property dirt cheap because it's in horrible condition. The investor goes in there and spends, I don't know, $50,000, $100,000 on fixing it up. They tear out all the drywall. They get it down to the studs. They put on a new roof. They do all this work, and you can't tell me that they don't know anything about the condition of that property. To me, it's a lazy agent, because most sellers, to be honest, we know this, most sellers do what they're told to do, in most cases, by their agent. So I can't imagine there's too many sellers out there, unless they're, like I said, they're flippers, that will basically say, I'm not going to disclose anything I know about this property. If you are a buyer's agent and you run into a situation where there's not going to be a SPUDS, and again, just because it's in the listing, still has to be in the purchase contract, because nothing in the listing is an agreement between seller and buyer. It has to be written into the contract that no SPUDS, and many times they do no insurance history available either. Push back on that listing agent and find out why. And if they say, well, it's, the seller's been renting the property, that's the other one I love. They've been renting it as an investment property for the last 10 years. They've never lived in it. Okay, really? Really? You want to tell me that that seller doesn't know that if there's ever been an air conditioning issue or a plumbing leak or anything, and that rental property that they've had bazillion years? We have, as an industry, moved a little bit off of center on this, where no SPUDS available is becoming more and more common, especially through the short sales. And again, I don't understand how this started, why it's accepted, and why we're not pushing back, because just because a property is in a short sale, that doesn't relieve the seller's legal obligation to disclose anything that they know about the property. So again, as a buyer's agent, push back to the listing agent and say, well, I'm just curious, did you have a little discussion with your seller, and did you tell your seller that it's okay to break the law, that they don't have to disclose? And, oh, by the way, do you know that, that's fraud? And if you did tell them that it's okay, that you're a party to fraud as well? And see if you can just kind of, maybe not in such blatant words, but sugarcoat it a little bit, but push back, because I think a lot of these agents think they can get away with this, and they think it's okay, and it's not. So that's kind of my my soapbox regarding as-is and SPUDS. So the form, we have seller, buyer, premises, address, date. Line 5, the following additional terms and conditions are hereby included as part of the contract between seller and buyer for the above referenced premises. All terms and conditions of the contract are hereby included herein, and delivery of all notices and documentation shall be deemed delivered and received when sent as required by Section 8M of the contract. And just as a reminder, 8M of the contract is the definition of notice. Unless otherwise provided, delivery of all notices and documentation required or permitted hereunder shall be in writing and deemed delivered and received when, number 1, hand-delivered, number 2, sent via facsimile transmission, number 3, sent via electronic mail if email addresses are provided herein, number 4, sent by recognized overnight courier service and addressed to buyer as indicated in Section 8R, which is the buyer's name and information, to seller as indicated in Section 9A, and to the escrow company indicated in Section 3A. So again, going back to number 3, sent via electronic mail if email addresses are provided herein. We're talking about agent email addresses. I'm sure many of you remember that I've always said, do not put your email address in a contract unless you check your email and you can guarantee that you're going to check your email no matter what, no matter if you're on vacation, no matter if you're in the hospital, no matter what, you're unconscious for a week, you will always check your email on at least a daily basis. If you can guarantee all of that under every condition, then sure, go ahead and put your email address in there. But if you can't, and somebody sends you a BINSR or a SPUDS, and you don't get it to your client within so many days, they could lose their window on responding to that and either canceling the contract or requesting repairs because it's been sitting in your email box for 3 or 4 days or 5 days or 6 days or 7 days, and now you've lost the window per the terms, the time period per the terms of the purchase contract. So it's not saying that you can't communicate with the other agent via email and you can't send documents back and forth via email. All I'm saying is if you put your email address in the purchase contract, then you are held responsible that when anything hits your mailbox, whether it sits there and it's not read for days, that's considered notice per the purchase contract if your email address is on those lines in the purchase contract. So just keep that in mind, okay? So line A, seller and buyer agree that the premises is being sold in its existing condition as is. As is essentially the definition, or existing condition is the definition of as is. And seller makes no warranty to buyer, either express or implied, as to, number one, the condition of the premises, including but not limited to seller's warranties in lines 166 and 168, and that's where, you know, the mechanical, electrical, cooling, plumbing, et cetera, which buyer hereby waives. Number two, zoning of the premises. Number three, premises fitness for any particular use or purpose. However, seller warrants and shall maintain and repair the premises so that pursuant to lines 169 to 170, which is the bottom section of the seller warranties under 5A, at the earlier of possession or close of escrow, there's our little verbiage again in case it's a prepossession, the premises, including all additional existing personal property included in the sale, will be in substantially the same condition as on the date of contract acceptance, and all personal property not included in the sale and all debris will be removed from the premises. So even though it's an as-is essentially says, buyer, you are accepting the property in its existing condition at the time the contract is accepted. It's the benefit of the bargain. The buyer knows what they're buying, okay, and they agree to accept it in its current condition. But if that condition changes anytime during the escrow period, whether it's a roof leak, an air conditioning unit goes out, you know, a comet falls on it, whatever the case is, the seller is required and responsible per the terms and conditions of the contract that they will repair or do whatever they need to do to the property to bring it back to its substantially the same condition as it was at the time of close of escrow. So the time of contract acceptance. I get this question a lot. If there are changes, even though it's as is, if there's changes to the property, the buyer no longer has the benefit of the bargain. The buyer says, I'm going to buy it in this condition, but only this condition. I don't necessarily agree to buy it if the condition changes during the escrow period. So that's why it is the seller's obligation per the terms of the contract to still make any repairs necessary for anything that happens during the property during the close of escrow. And they'll also remove the debris from the premises. Number two, buyers advised to conduct independent inspections and investigations regarding the premises within the inspection period as specified in Section 6A, which is the inspection period section. Buyer retains the right pursuant to 6J, which is the buyer disapproval section, shall not be obligated to correct any defects that may be discovered during buyer's inspections and investigations or otherwise. However, a little caveat there, it doesn't say the buyer still can't ask for repairs, okay? There's nothing that says that because, again, we're referencing back to 6J, Section 6J of the contract, which is the buyer disapproval section, the buyer can still ask for something. Seller is just not obligated to fix anything. So if the buyer asks, for some repairs on a Binzer, seller says no, then the buyer has the right to cancel after they've received the seller's response. So they can still ask, they can still, prolong things, going forward or not by the time frames built into the Binzer. So hopefully everybody understands that. Number C, notwithstanding the foregoing, this is kind of a exception. If an on-site wastewater treatment facility, which is the septic addendum, essentially, has been installed on the premises, seller and buyer agree to complete and execute the AAR on-site wastewater treatment facility addendum. Again, we look at it as we refer to it as the septic addendum. And seller agrees to pay for the facility inspections, fees or repairs, again, important, fees or repairs as set forth therein. So it's kind of like an as-is except for the septic. So referring back to the on-site wastewater treatment facility addendum, it does say that seller shall pay for repairs to correct physical or operational deficiencies in the facility identified by the facility inspector, which is the septic inspector, provided that such repairs do not exceed 1% of the purchase price or blank dollars. If repair costs exceed that amount the seller agrees to pay, buyer may immediately cancel this contract or seller may cancel this contract unless buyer agrees in writing to pay such costs in excess of the amount that the seller is obligated to pay. So again, if there's any repairs necessary to the septic, absent of anything written in differently into either this, the blank lines or into the contract itself, seller does agree to repair any issues that need to be done regarding the septic and to pay for the inspection fee and the transfer fee. I know back to REO properties, as is, all REO properties are almost always, have always, and always will be as-is properties. And now you have this addendum that says, well, okay, well, they're going to pay for the repairs and for the fees, and REOs usually don't want to pay for anything. Two things. Number one, they usually have their own addenda to a contract. REOs have their own addendum that essentially says we're not going to do anything. And number two, as far as who pays for the inspection or who pays for the fees, because there's that transfer fee, and there has to be the transfer form that title companies usually will send to the ADAQ on every transaction, every closing where there's a septic tank. As a service, they'll go ahead and do that, but there is a transfer fee that is paid to the ADAQ. ADAQ doesn't care who pays it as long as it's paid, and it's it's $50. So I would assume that there's not going to be a whole lot of deals that are deal breakers over a $50 fee as far as the transfer goes. And again, actually the law says the seller shall have the inspection and shall pay for the transfer fee, but in essence, they don't care who does it as long as it gets done and it gets paid, whether it's the buyer or the seller. So lines 23, 24D, seller acknowledges that selling the premises as is does not relieve the seller of the legal obligation to disclose all known material latent defects to buyer. So it's right there, black and white, that seller has the obligation to disclose anything they know about the property to the buyer. What does latent mean? Latent is one of those words that it may not be real obvious. Seller may know that they've got mold behind a wall due to a previous leak that's been fixed. Seller may know, certain things that just are not obvious, that there's a crack in the slab underneath the carpet, or there's a crack in the kitchen floor that's been covered up by flooring of some type in the kitchen. These are things that the seller still must disclose. Material, it's kind of interesting that everywhere, like in the purchase contract where we use the word, or in the SPUDs where we use the word material, we always say in parentheses, and I say we because I've been on all these committees, parentheses, important. So what does material mean? It means it's important. And for some reason it was missed in this as-is, but that's essentially what material obviously means. We can't assume that members of the public, whether they're sellers or buyers, understand our language, our real estate ease, if you will. So we try to make it as black and white as we possibly can. E, line 25, in the event that any provision contained in this addendum conflicts in whole or in part with any of the terms contained in the contract, the provisions of this addendum shall prevail and the conflicting terms are hereby considered deleted and expressly waived by both buyer and seller. So if anything is written into the contract contrary to this addendum, that's where you got to be careful. This addendum, it basically says that this addendum will prevail. Anytime you have written in anything, whether it's in a contract, whether it's an addendum, it will supersede the boilerplate language all the time. So, but where you could have some issues is if you do have language that's written into a contract and now you have a boilerplate and an addendum that conflicts. Per the terms of lines 25 through 27, the boilerplate and the addendum will prevail. So essentially that is it. Since this is an addendum, we just have the very last page, which is the exculpatory clause, the get-out-of-jail-free card, as I call it. Buyer acknowledges the buyer is hereby advised to seek appropriate counsel regarding the risks of buying a property in its as-is condition. That's bold uppercase. The buyer recognizes, acknowledges, and agrees that broker or brokers are not qualified nor licensed to conduct due diligence with respect to the premises or the surrounding area. Just noticed a typo that P in premises should have been capitalized. The buyer is instructed to consult with qualified licensed professionals to assist in buyer's due diligence efforts because conducting due diligence with respect to the premises, should have been capital P, and the surrounding area is beyond the scope of the broker's expertise in licensing. Buyer expressly releases and holds harmless brokers from liability from any defects or condition that could have been discovered by inspection or investigation. Then we've got bold, seller and buyer hereby expressly release, hold harmless, and indemnify brokers in this transaction from any and all liability and responsibility regarding financing, the condition, square footage, lot lines, boundaries, value, rent rolls, environmental problems, sanitation systems, roof, wood infestation, building code, governmental regulations, insurance, or any other matter related to the value or condition of the premises. So in those 3 lines, they pretty much have everything in there, and just in case not everything is in there, they added or any other matter relating to the value or the condition of the premises. So it pretty much covers everything. So this is the same exculpatory clause, by the way, that's in the purchase contract, and it's also used in many of the other AAR forms. So then that's where you have buyer's and seller's signature, and since this is an addendum, it must be initialed by your manager within 10 business days after the execution of the addendum. Whoever the last person was to sign it, and date it, and make sure every single form you ever have your client sign is dated, because it's amazing to me how many times dates are missing, and it can make all the difference in the world. If a date is missing on a purchase contract, how do you know, or even on an as-is addendum for that matter, how do you know when the first day of the inspection period is? So again, by statute, your manager needs to initial, or in case of home base, needs the documents need to be in home base and approved by your manager within 10 business days after it's been fully executed. So no matter what the addendum is, if it's a counteroffer, if it's the 15th addendum or the 23rd counteroffer, all of those must be initialed by your manager or approved in the system within 10 business days. And as you all know, we have forms that says if a form comes in late or is missing, you, the agent, must fill out the form and explain why it was late or why it was missing. And so we can put that in the file because it's one of the real hot spots on ADRE audits, which we are still holding our breath. We know it's coming one of these days, that they will be looking at to make sure that our managers are initialing all the pertinent documents within 10 business days. So that's about it. We're going to unmute you right now, so if you have any questions about the as-is or any other form, any other general real estate question, please feel free to ask me now. Hold on, you're being unmuted right now.
Okay, we do here in North Scottsdale.
Okay, what you have, Paige?
Thanks. So it's about the cure period notice, and it's really cure in general. If we want to make sure that if the buyer doesn't want to cancel, but it invokes this cure period, can you just talk a little bit about the fact that this won't require that the buyer to cancel?
Sure, absolutely. There is no automatic breach of the contract, okay, under any condition. There's no automatic breach of the contract. In order for one party to call the other one in breach, you have to issue a cure that is a cure notice, which essentially is not cured, to have one of the parties in breach. So if the buyer wants to position themselves by putting the seller, or vice versa, seller positioning themselves to call the buyer in breach, then they must issue the cure. But that doesn't necessarily mean they have to act on it at the end of those 3 days. For instance, where this question comes up a lot is if the loan docs are not to the title company within 3 days prior to close of escrow. And the seller says, well, I'm willing to wait, and, I can wait until next week, or I can wait, this out because I don't want to start the process all over again. But they still should issue the cure. So if ultimately they still don't get them, now the buyer's in breach. They don't have to, because every time you issue a cure that gives the buyer or the potentially breaching party 3 days, whether it's the seller or the buyer, to comply. So you're postponing it 3 more days unless you've already positioned yourself that there is a breach on the table.
Okay, thanks. So the realtors will just counsel their buyers that they don't have to exercise that right, with this automatically being in the walkthrough. It just puts them on notice.
Correct. It's positioning.
Okay,
thank
you.
Oh, wait, Lake Cavis has got a question.
Go, Jim.
Okay, it's Susan.
Yeah, Martha, I actually have 2 questions. I'm going back to the As-Is Addendum, Section E. I'm currently in a situation like this, and we countered something in a counter offer, which in my mind is a part of the purchase contract. If something would come up and you would want to counter something out of one of the addendums, should you counter the addendum or do an addendum to the As-Is Addendum, or how should you approach that so that the terms of the addendum do not prevail over the terms of the purchase contract?
That's a very good question. You would essentially have to counter out the language in the addendum, because the language in the addendum is pretty clear that if there's any provision contained in this addendum that conflicts in whole or in part with any of the terms contained in the contract, which would include any counteroffers, because the counteroffers are now part of the contract, the provision of this addendum shall prevail. And if there are conflicting terms, then they are deleted, and the conflicting terms are hereby considered deleted and expressly waived by buyer and seller. So the conflicting terms in the counter would be deleted. So yes, you should counter it out.
All right. Now my second question is, we have a 10-day inspection period. The seller has 10 days to deliver the CC&Rs and homeowners association documents and so on and so forth. At the end of the 10 days, we either have to accept, reject, or ask for repairs on a BINSR. So let's pretend we're buying as is, we've done our inspections, everything's good, we would like to continue on, submit the BINSR, we're accepting the property. But we still don't have our CC&Rs. Now I need to issue a cure today because now it's day 11, and my buyer now has 5 more days to review the CC&Rs, and he can also cancel the contract and get his earnest deposit back if he disagrees with the CC&Rs, even though he was forced to play his hand on the BINSR because he was at the end of his inspection period.
Well, Susan, let me clarify something. The CC&Rs and any of the title commitment, any of the HOAs, the title commitment, anything that comes from the title company is not affected by the inspection period, the 10 days, okay? Because the title company is not a party to the contract. So the buyer can't say to a seller's title company, I must get those documents within 10 days. So the purchase contract doesn't have a drop-dead date for those documents. It does say that the buyer has
the HOA addendum, it shows the 10 days, or depending upon the number of units in the association. 50 or more, they have 5, 50 or under, they have 10.
After they receive them.
No, the seller has 10 days to provide the CC&Rs and other HOA addenda to the buyer. And they haven't yet, and we're at the end of our 10-day inspection period tomorrow.
And the buyer has 5 days to approve after they receive it.
Yeah. So how do you handle that when you're...
Susan, let me, you know what I'm going to do? Well, after this call, I'll give you, hang out, don't go anywhere in the office, and I'll call you on that, because I do want to look over the HOA addenda, because the contract is real specific that, and I believe it's the 50 units or less, where the seller says they will get that information within so many days to the buyer, but I want to check on that. Because, again, now that statute, the stuff that's in the HOA addendum, the kind of the small print, if you will, although it's not really small, is based on statute.
Okay.
And I'm sure it does not conflict with the purchase contract. So I need to look over that, and I'll get back to you on that.
Yeah.
Anyone else? No one else has any questions about anything?
Martha, Sun City.
Hey, Sun City.
I have a question regarding the cure notice. If it's like maybe they've done the walkthrough 2 days before they send over a cure notice, would you actually have to allow them 3 more days? Would you now have to extend?
I'm sorry, I missed the end of that the last part of that question.
Do you have to extend the contract date for closing?
Yeah, somebody asked kind of a similar question already, and the answer would be, according to Michelle Lind. See, I'm choosing my words very carefully because we're not lawyers, and we can't give legal opinion. According to Michelle Lind, who is a lawyer, she states in her book that yes, the close of escrow can be extended if there's the question before was if you do your walkthrough on a Wednesday, there are issues with the property, so you fill out, and now you have an automatic cure notice on number 2 in the walkthrough form. Could that automatically push the close of escrow out to the following week? And the answer is yes. Okay, but we would also advise our clients to go seek legal counsel at that point. Did that answer your question?
I don't know why.
Do we have to have them sign or initial and date something agreeing that they're going to extend the closing? The second part of my answer previous was, get on the phone with the listing agent, explain what the situation is, and again, this is assuming that your buyers don't want to close, that they want, because, also understand that there can be a cure notice issued even after the close of escrow. So let's say a buyer moves in and everything's fine, and then they, as they're moving in, they realize that there's something wrong that wasn't disclosed, okay? And they want the seller to address that particular item. So they can still even issue a cure after the close of escrow. And if the seller doesn't cure whatever the issue is, then the buyer can seek their legal remedies per the terms of the contract. So the buyer could close with the understanding that they're going to give the seller still a couple of days after the close of escrow, because maybe their furniture's on a moving ban, at the Arizona border at this point, and they don't want to have to store all their furniture and everything. So it's to the buyer's best interest to go ahead and close. So it's kind of on an individual basis. But to cover all bases, I would say yes, it would be a good idea to get an addendum extending the close of escrow until all those matters have been resolved. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Martha, Jim Callery.
Hi, Jim Callery.
Hi. So back to, hang on, I'm getting an echo here, sorry. Back to Michelle Lind's opinion, I'm going to have to pick up that book myself, but do you think the intention there is that it can be extended? So it's a Wednesday walkthrough, it can be extended if everybody agrees, or is it automatically extended by doing the cure notice?
It's not automatically extended. Let me see if I can find in her book. By the way, if anybody's interested, you can buy her book. She's in the second printing of it.
through AAR. It's like $29 or something. But you can also get the online version, which is actually nice because you can copy and print right into an email or whatever, and that's like $9.95. So I highly advise anyone to obtain the book. It's like one of my Bibles. I have many Bibles. That they have two forms Bibles, and I have Michelle's book. If I can just look up here and see 168. Okay. Okay, here's the question. What action should a buyer take if, on the day of close of escrow, the buyer discovers that the seller has failed to complete an agreed-upon repair? Okay, so that's the question we've been asked. The buyer should deliver a cure notice to the seller. The buyer may then delay closing for up to 3 days to allow the seller the opportunity to repair the item. Now, excuse me, again, the buyer may then, it doesn't say shall or will, it says they may. So it's up to them. And the alternative, the buyer may close escrow, and if the seller fails to make the repair within 3 days, pursue the seller for the breach and recover the cost to repair in either small claims court, mediation, arbitration, or litigation. It goes on to say, if the buyer delays close of escrow for the 3-day cure period and the seller still has not completed the repair, the seller is in breach of the contract. Section 7B of the contract, which is the breach section. Section 7B of the contract sets forth the remedies in the event of a breach. It says the non-breaching party may cancel this contract and or proceed against the breaching party in any claim or remedy that the non-breaching party may have in law or equity subject to the mediation, et cetera, et cetera. So again, it says they may cancel and or proceed. But it doesn't say they have to cancel. Okay? So if anybody has that book already, it's on page 168 if anybody's interested.
Thanks, Martha. I'm going to pick up a copy of that book.
Okay, great, great. Anybody else have any questions? Okay, well, thank you all for tuning in. And, yeah, we made it almost exactly an hour, so I appreciate it.
Can we squeeze one more question in?
Oh, sure, absolutely.
Thank you. Let's have Sue here.
Thank you. This is Sue Bigall. I'm currently a dual agent on property out in the Property Owners Association Stagecoach Trails for vacant land. Even though the Property Owners Association, not an HOA and not a planned community, we do use the HOA addendum for transfer fees and for the annual fees. In the contract, I put the annual fee, and I put the HOA transfer fee because I'm involved in the association and I know what they are. And then I put NA for any other fees because there's never been any other fees that the association itself charges. I currently got a call from the title company that when they requested the CC&R from the association's property management office, that there was an additional charge of $90-some that is payable directly to the manager's office, not to the HOA. Plus, the manager also receives the $150 transfer fee. It's payable to the association, and the association pays it to the manager for processing the paperwork. So on this HOA form, I'm not seeing anything on here of a third party charging any fees that should be paid by the buyer or seller. It only says association fees.
When you say manager, are you saying the property manager for the association?
Property manager for the association put a fee, a charge, sent it over to the title company with the association fees, transfer fee with the association
right.
Annual dues.
That's the HOA fee. That's almost.
And his
I shouldn't say almost all. Pardon me?
And it's then his personal payable to the manager directly, an additional fee.
Wow.
That's
not
John Smith, that the association itself has never approved.
So John Smith, the manager, is pocketing $90 over every transaction.
Exactly.
Wow, not a bad deal.
Not including he gets the whole $150 transfer fee, so really it's getting like $245 off of every deal.
And I assume that is part of the CC&Rs or bylaws or something that says that they can do that. There's got to be some
right. It does say in the manager's contract that the transfer fee is payable back to that full amount is paid to the property manager. But my question is the property manager allowed to charge additional fees directly payable to him?
It would have to be in the HOA document someplace where the HOA...
Yeah, I'm supposed to bring it up at our next board meeting on Monday because I talked to the president and my husband is also on the board and neither one of them heard of these additional fees.
Well, yeah, he can't just, the manager just can't arbitrarily say, okay, I want a cut of every deal. You know, there's got to be, because they're working for the HOA. So there has to be some type.
I called the manager's office and I asked what was going on, and she said that's something new that they did about 6 months ago, that they're charging a disclosure fee on top of what the association charges for the transfer fee and the annual dues.
That's interesting. Yeah, let me know how that board meeting goes.
Yeah, well, because the issue is what I have currently is we're closing tomorrow. They waived the $25 rush fee because I just took it upon myself to call over at the association and just said that the paperwork's sitting there, so if they could get it to the title companies sooner than later, you know, that'd be great. So then the title company called me and said there was a $25 rush fee, so when I called back to the manager, she waived that fee, but she says that the property management company itself is taking it upon them to charge us additional fees. But in my HOA form, I put that there was NA for any additional charges. So she called me up, the title company wanted to know who's going to pay for it. Because it's a fee that should have never been charged.
Right,
so
right.
Anytime we just split it between the buyer and seller, but...
Yeah, I mean, that is an issue. HOAs are kind of the bane of our existence in many cases. And in fact, there was a new law that just went into effect. It was supposed to take effect last Friday regarding HOAs, especially with tenants. That there's some HOAs out there that require if a tenant is going to lease a property, that they must see the lease and the tenant's application and credit report. And so the HOAs are, you know, they think that they're above reproach and law and everything else.
It's not
but anyway, in this case, what happened in this particular case, it was supposed to go into effect, and it was signed by the governor last June, supposed to go into effect last Friday. It was last Friday, the Friday before, I can't remember, but it was last Friday. And it was there's a consumer HOA advocate group out there that went to the AG's office and said how the bill was it was called what they call a striker bill. Started out as a campaign financing bill and ended up as an ended up towards the end also being an HOA bill, and they said that you can't do that. So bottom line is they found that HOA stuff unconstitutional. So it's going to come back in the legislature this fall. But my point being is the legislature's all over these HOAs and the fees that they can pay.
Well, the other issue we have is that our association says they're not an HOA. They don't follow the Title 33, that we're a property owners association that is incorporated, and it follows only title, corporation.
I don't know. It sounds like sounds like somebody's got, they're trying to circumvent something there. But Susan, I appreciate the information. Again, I'm going to be calling up there in a few minutes on this other HOA addendum issue, so we can talk further if you're going to be around then as well. Okay?
Sure.
All right, again, thank you, everybody, for attending. And if you do have any further questions, never hesitate to either send me an email, pick up the phone, give me a call, go to your manager or whatever. And it looks like the next webinar should be scheduled